11:51 p.m. That time usually means sleep, or for someone like me, a quiet moment to double-check a flight itinerary before the chaos of holiday travel. I was in my apartment in Colorado Springs, my standard-issue duffel bag open on the bed, half filled with civilian clothes I rarely wore. I was an Air Force intelligence officer, trained to anticipate threats, read patterns, and neutralize risks. But the threat that night didn't come from a foreign adversary. It came from a cell phone notification. It buzzed once, sharp and loud in the silence of my living room. A text from my mother, Megan. I picked it up, expecting a last-minute request: pick up wine, bring the good cheese, don't wear that severe jacket. Instead, I read the words that would redefine the rest of my life. The Winter Gala is for our high-end investors this year. You don't fit the aesthetic. It's best if you stay in Colorado. I stared at the screen. The blue light washed over my hands, making them look pale, almost ghostly. Don't fit the aesthetic. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. An eviction from Christmas. Seconds later, another notification pinged. My brother, Jonathan. A photo popped up in the family group chat. Vance Family Gala Prep. A selfie of him in a tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch, grinning like he owned the world. And then, right below Mom's rejection text, a little heart icon appeared. Jonathan had liked the message. He had seen me get cut out, and he had hearted it. Panic is a civilian reaction. I didn't have the luxury of it. I didn't throw the phone. My pulse didn't even jump. In my line of work, you assess the intel, you verify the source, and you execute a response. I looked at my packed bag. Then I looked at the snow falling outside my window. They thought this text would break me. They thought I'd beg, apologize for being too stiff, too military, too whatever they decided I was that week. But they forgot who they were texting. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was a strategist, and they had just handed me the clearest signal I'd ever received. I typed one word back. Understood. The phone went face down on the nightstand. I walked over to my duffel bag, zipped it shut, and put it back in the closet. I wasn't going home for Christmas. But I wasn't staying here, either. Because while they were worrying about aesthetics, I was about to worry about assets. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. And since we are ringing in a new chapter, I want to wish you all a very happy new year. May this year bring you strength, success, and fresh starts. If you're ready for this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to support the channel. It means the world to me. I sat in the silence of my military housing, the only sound the faint hum of the heating vent struggling against the Colorado winter. I unpacked my bag slowly, methodically, folding the civilian sweaters I wouldn't need, putting away the gifts I wouldn't give. This wasn't the first time I'd been pushed to the periphery of the family, but it was the first time they'd locked the gate. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the empty duffel. Why didn't I feel more shocked? Why wasn't I sobbing? Because deep down, I knew this text wasn't an anomaly. It was the inevitable conclusion of a 29-year experiment in conditioning. In intelligence work, we study how people are turned. It rarely happens overnight. It's slow, a gradual erosion of boundaries, a drip feed of criticism mixed with just enough praise to keep you hopeful. They call it the boiling frog syndrome. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in tepid water and slowly raise the heat, it will sit there until it cooks to death. My father, Nathaniel, was the master of the slow boil. I remembered being 23, fresh out of officer training, proud of my commission. I'd come home for a weekend, wearing my uniform. Nathaniel had looked me up and down, frowned, and said, "It's a bit severe, isn't it? Jonathan is launching a lifestyle brand. Now that's exciting." Jonathan's brand was a line of luxury hoodies that never went into production. But Nathaniel invested $50,000 in it anyway. I invested my own sweat and blood into serving my country, and I got a critique on the cut of my jacket. That was the temperature rising. Then there was the money. That was always the leverage. Not that they gave it to me, no, I was the one who gave. I was the reliable one with the steady government paycheck and the pristine credit score. My mind flashed back to 6 years ago. I was home on leave, exhausted from a deployment rotation. Nathaniel had sat me down in his study, pouring me a whiskey I didn't want. He looked stressed, older. "Brittany, we have an opportunity to refinance the chalet," he'd said, sliding a stack of papers across his mahogany desk. "Rates are at an all-time low. But because of the business expansion code for Jonathan's latest failure, my debt-to-income ratio is a little high. I need a cosigner. Just a formality to secure the asset for the family legacy. For the family legacy, the magic words. The paper sat there on the desk, heavy with obligation. The loan was for $180,000, a massive sum for a 23-year-old. But I looked at my father's face, and for once, he wasn't looking at me with disappointment. He was looking at me with need. I wanted to be needed. I wanted to be part of the legacy. So, like the well-trained frog I was, I didn't question the heat. I picked up the pen and signed my name, Brittany Vance. I thought I was buying my way into their respect. I thought I was securing my place at the table. Looking down at my hands now, resting on my knees in the dim light of my apartment, I realized the water had boiled away a long time ago. I wasn't a part of the legacy. I was just the insurance policy, the silent partner who carried the risk while they enjoyed the reward. And now that the aesthetic of the gala mattered more than the person who made it possible, they thought they could just discard me. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen illuminated my face, no longer pale, but set in a hard line. They thought the text was the end of the conversation. They thought I would fade away, hurt and silent, just like I always did. But they forgot one thing. When you sign a contract, you don't just take on the debt. You take on the rights. I wasn't going to cry about being uninvited. I was going to find out exactly what I had signed 6 years ago, and I had a feeling that formality was about to become the most important document of my life. I sat at my makeshift desk, the hum of my server tower the only company I had. Brittany Vance, the daughter, had been hurt, but Captain Vance, the intel officer, she was operational. I logged into my secure cloud storage, bypassing the standard two-factor authentication with the ease of muscle memory. I wasn't looking for classified dossiers or enemy movements. I was hunting for something far more dangerous, a PDF file titled Vance Chalet Refinance, signed 2019. It took me 3 minutes to find it. The file opened, filling the screen with dense legal jargon. I scrolled past the standard borrower agreements, the interest rate disclosures, the amortization schedules. I was looking for the fine print, the clauses nobody reads because they trust the people asking them to sign. I found it on page 24, buried under a section regarding default and remedies. Article 14. Section C. Commercial liability and asset protection. In the event the primary collateral, the property, is utilized for commercial purposes, including but not limited to short-term rentals, hospitality services, or event hosting, without the express written consent of the cosigner, said cosigner reserves the right to assume immediate executive control of the property to mitigate liability. The air left my lungs. Executive control. My father hadn't just needed my credit score. He had needed a guarantor against his own risky behavior. And in his arrogance, assuming I would never read the contract or never have the spine to enforce it, he had signed away his authority. I opened a new tab. I typed in the Vance Experience Lake Tahoe into the search bar. The results populated instantly. My jaw tightened. It wasn't just a house, it was an empire. There it was on Airbnb, VRBO, and a dozen luxury rental sites. The Vance Chalet, Experience Alpine Luxury. The photos were professional, glossy. The description boasted of a curated mountain getaway, perfect for corporate retreats and exclusive events. The nightly rate? $2,500. And the calendar? Fully booked. They weren't broke. They weren't struggling. They were raking in tens of thousands of dollars a month using an asset I was liable for. I scrolled through the reviews. Amazing venue for our wedding. Host Nathaniel was charming. The winter gala package is a must. They had monetized my credit risk. They were living like kings on a castle built on my back. And when I became inconvenient to the aesthetic, they tried to lock me out. Rage, cold and sharp, settled in my chest. This wasn't just familial betrayal. This was financial exploitation. They were exposing me to massive liability. If a guest got hurt, if a fire started, I would be the one sued. My security clearance, my career, my entire life could be destroyed by their greed. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Mac, I said when he answered. Major Mackenzie was a JAG officer I'd served with in Germany. He was brilliant, ruthless, and owed me a favor. Brittany, it's midnight. Everything okay? I need a consultation, I said, my voice steady. Hypothetically, if I hold a controlling interest clause in a property deed due to unauthorized commercial use, how quickly can I execute an eviction? I heard the rustle of sheets as he sat up. Hypothetically? If you have proof of the commercial use and the deed is solid. About as fast as you can print the paperwork. I have the proof, I said, staring at the Airbnb listing on my screen. I have the deed. Who's the target? Mac asked, his voice sharpening. My parents, I said. And Mac? I'm going to need a cease and desist for a business called The Vance Experience. It turns out I'm the majority shareholder. The call ended. I looked at the packed bag in my closet. I wasn't staying in Colorado. I was going to Lake Tahoe. It was time to go to war. Lake Tahoe was blindingly white under the winter sun. I drove my rental car, not toward the chalet, but toward the county clerk's office. The air was thin, sharp, and cold, just like my Focus. I had the deed. I had the Airbnb listing. But in my world, you don't go into a tactical situation with just one weapon. You secure the perimeter. I walked into the clerk's office, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor. I requested the property records for the Vance Chalet at 42 Alpine Ridge Road. The clerk, a tired woman named Barb, handed me a thick file. I flipped past the tax assessments and the zoning maps. I was looking for something specific. Jonathan had been bragging on Instagram about the new glamping pods they'd installed in the backyard luxury yurts with heated floors. But structures like that require permits, especially in a protected environmental zone like Tahoe. I found the permits near the back of the file. Application for accessory dwelling units, ADU, 4 units. The application was dated 6 months ago. The applicant was listed as Nathaniel Vance, but the signature line required the property owner's authorization. The signature stared back at me, mocking my trust. Brittany Vance. It was my name, but it wasn't my handwriting. The loops were too wide, the slant too leisurely. It was my mother's handwriting. My mother, Megan, who prided herself on her penmanship, had forged my signature on a federal land use document. I felt a cold sweat break out under my wool coat. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This wasn't just a breach of contract or unauthorized commercial use. This was forgery. This was fraud. And because I was a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force, holding a top-secret security clearance, having my name on a fraudulent federal document could trigger an investigation that would end my career. They hadn't just used my credit. They had risked my freedom. They had gambled my entire life on a few luxury yurts so they could charge an extra $500 a night. I took a photo of the document. Then I asked Barb for a certified copy. Is everything okay, hun? Barb asked, noticing my pale face. No, I said, my voice dangerously calm. But it's about to be handled. The walk back to the car felt different, heavier, yet faster. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the snow. My phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. Jonathan had just posted a story. Gala night. The Vances do it best. I watched the video. The chalet was lit up like a beacon. Guests were arriving in black ties and gowns. My father was holding court by the ice sculpture. My mother was laughing, a glass of champagne in her hand. They were celebrating their theft. They were dancing on the grave of my trust. I started the car. I didn't drive fast. I drove with precision. I checked the time. 6:30. The gala was in full swing. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't wearing a gown. I was wearing a sharp, tailored blazer and dark slacks, my civilian armor. I looked like what I was, a woman who had come to collect a debt. I pulled out of the lot and turned onto the road leading up the mountain. The lights of the chalet blazed through the trees, guiding me in. They wanted a show. They wanted an aesthetic. I was about to give them a reality check they would never forget. I walked up the heated driveway, my boots crunching softly on the bits of gravel scattered over the ice. The air smelled of pine and expensive cologne. A valet rushed toward me, hand outstretched for keys I didn't have. Checking in for the gala? He asked, eyeing my severe attire. Something like that, I said, brushing past him. I reached the massive oak front doors. A security guard in a black suit stepped into my path. He had a clipboard and an earpiece. Name? He asked, bored. Brittany Vance, I said. He scanned the list, frowned. I don't see a Brittany Vance. Are you a +1? I pulled the deed from my inner blazer pocket. I didn't unfold it. I just held it up, the county seal catching the light. I'm the owner. Step aside. He hesitated, confused by the authority in my voice. In that split second of hesitation, I walked past him and pushed open the doors. The noise hit me first. A wall of jazz, laughter, and clinking crystal. The foyer was transformed. A towering Christmas tree dripped with gold ornaments. Waiters circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was beautiful. It was impressive. And it was all fake. I stood there, observing. My father, Nathaniel, was in the center of the room, laughing loudly at a joke made by a man in a tuxedo. My mother, Megan, was gliding between groups, playing the perfect hostess. I felt a strange detachment settle over me. This is what psychologists call dissociation, or maybe just clarity. I looked at the investors, men and women with hungry eyes, sipping my father's wine, believing his stories of success. The delusion of the empty wallet. That's what this was. My parents weren't wealthy. They were performers. They had built this entire stage, the chalet, the gala, the lifestyle on a foundation of debt that belonged to me. They were renting their status, paying for it with my credit score and my future. They didn't own the room. They were just squatters in a fantasy. And like all fantasies, it was fragile. It only existed as long as the lights stayed on. And I was about to cut the power. Brittany? The voice was sharp, annoyed. I turned to see Jonathan. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket that looked ridiculous. He was holding a drink, his face flushed. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, moving to block me from the main crowd. "Mom said you weren't coming. You're ruining the vibe." "The vibe?" I asked, looking at him. He was 32 years old, and he was still playing dress-up. Is that what we're calling federal fraud these days? A vibe? What are you talking about? Go home, Brittany. You're embarrassing yourself. He reached out to grab my arm, to usher me away like a nuisance. I didn't flinch. I sidestepped him with a fluid motion I'd learned in self-defense training, leaving him grabbing at empty air. He stumbled, spilling his drink on his velvet sleeve. I didn't look back. I walked straight toward the DJ booth in the corner of the room. The music was loud, some smooth jazz cover of a pop song. The DJ, a young guy in headphones, looked up as I approached. "Cut it," I said. "What?" he shouted over the bass. I reached past him and pulled the main output cable from the mixer. The music died with a sharp electronic pop. The silence that followed was heavy, sudden, and absolute. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. 100 pairs of eyes focused on me. My father turned, his smile freezing in place when he saw who was standing by the silent speakers. "Brittany?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "What is the meaning of this?" I stepped forward, into the center of the room. I didn't shout. I projected. "The party is over," I said. "Everyone needs to leave. Now." The silence in the room wasn't just quiet, it was terrified. In my line of work, you learn to read a room. This room had gone from celebration to confusion to fear in 10 seconds. "Excuse me?" My father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You don't tell my guests to leave. This is my house." "No," I said, my voice cutting through the space like a razor. "It isn't." The folder hit the table with a dull thud. "This property is currently under federal investigation for wire fraud, forgery, and unauthorized commercial use involving a commissioned military officer," I announced, scanning the crowd. "If you remain on the premises, you may be considered accessories to these felonies. I suggest you vacate immediately." Panic is contagious. One couple near the door grabbed their coats, then another. Then it was a flood. The investors, the people my father desperately needed to impress, were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. They didn't care about the aesthetic anymore. They cared about not getting arrested. Within 3 minutes, the room was empty, save for the caterers who were frantically packing up, and my family. Nathaniel marched toward me, trembling with rage. "How dare you?" he shouted, spit flying. "You ungrateful, spiteful child, you just ruined me." "Do you know who those people were?" "I don't care," I said. "And I'm not a child. I'm the owner." I flipped the folder open. Article 14, Section C. "You turned this house into a hotel without my consent. You breached the contract." Then I pulled out the second document, the forged permit. "And this? Forging my signature on a federal land use application? That's 5 years in prison, Dad. Minimum." Megan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Brittany, we didn't mean any harm. We just needed the permits quickly. We did it for the family." "For the family?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You did it for the money. You risked my career, my freedom, my entire life, so you could build some yurts and charge tourists extra. You didn't do it for me. You did it to me." Jonathan, who had been sulking by the bar, suddenly looked very sober. "Wait, forgery? Mom, you said she signed them." "She lied," I said, looking at my brother. Just like she lied about me not coming tonight. Just like they lied about being rich. I looked at my watch. You have 60 minutes. For what? Nathaniel whispered, the fight draining out of him. To vacate, I said. Pack your bags. Take your clothes. Leave the furniture. It's a business asset now. And since I control the business to mitigate liability, I control the assets. We have nowhere to go, Megan wailed, grabbing my arm. Please, Brittany, it's Christmas. You can't do this to your own parents. Think about our reputation. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, the hand that had texted me, "You don't fit the aesthetic," the hand that had forged my name. I gently, firmly removed her grip. You traded your daughter for an aesthetic, I said, my voice quiet but final. Now you have neither. I turned to the security guard, who was watching with wide eyes. Escort them out in 1 hour. If they resist, call the sheriff. I've already filed the report. I walked out of the room, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own greed. I didn't look back. The silence of the chalet was different now. It wasn't the terrified silence of the party or the oppressive silence of my childhood. It was the silence of a clean slate. It was 3 days after Christmas. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside buried under a pristine white blanket. Inside, the house was empty. The rented furniture was gone, liquidated to cover the legal fees for the fraud investigation my parents were now facing. The glamping pods were dismantled, the permits revoked. My parents were staying in a motel 20 miles down the mountain. Jonathan had gone back to the city, his vibe thoroughly ruined. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I stopped in the foyer, where the Christmas tree had stood. The ghost of the gala still lingered, a stray sequin on the floor. The faint scent of expensive perfume, but the energy was gone. I didn't feel triumphant. Revenge isn't sweet, it's just heavy. But as I stood there, looking out at the frozen lake, I felt lighter. The burden of being the wallet, the fixer, the good daughter, was gone. I had cut the cord. I walked to the fireplace and lit a match. The dry wood caught quickly, the flames crackling and popping, filling the room with warmth. I wasn't going to sell the chalet, that would be the easy way out. Instead, I had a new plan. I had already spoken to Mac and a few contacts at the VA. This wasn't going to be the Vance experience anymore. It was going to be a retreat, a place for veterans recovering from trauma, for people who had been cast out by their own families, for the invisible siblings who needed a place to be seen. No price tag, no aesthetic requirements, just a warm fire and a door that was always open. I sat down on the hearth, watching the fire dance. For the first time in 29 years, I wasn't waiting for an invitation. I was the one holding the keys. And to everyone watching this, to everyone who is checking their phone right now, waiting for a text that will never come, hoping for an apology that isn't on its way, stop waiting. You don't need their permission to exist. You don't need their validation to be worthy. And you certainly don't need to buy a seat at a table where you aren't respected. Build your own table, light your own fire, and if they try to tell you that you don't fit the aesthetic, change the locks. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, share this story. Let's remind each other that we don't need their table to be fed.